All right, how's everybody doing? Hopefully, we have a different crop of folks on tonight from different courses. Um, I've got a good topic tonight, so hopefully it's going to be beneficial for you. I'm going to push through a lot of links. So I'm recording it like usual. So if you are listening to this not live, that's fine. And if you have to leave, it will still be recorded and posted to YouTube, and you can share it with others if you want. All right, so I'm going to get right into it. So I have decided to focus this night on design and sustainable development, contemporary design challenges. And the reason why I decided to do that is because I don't know, it's stuff I work on for one, and secondly, I happen to be teaching 3 courses right now, and that applies to all the courses. There's a course 322 undergrad, which is coming live now this week, just starting, which is about sustainable development as a concept. And it's kind of a survey course, and that really has an impact on a lot of all aspects of that course. We've got 586 going, which is, we're moving into that part of the course where we're trying to kind of reconcile worldviews between biospheric integrity and human development through communication. So design clearly has a role to play there. And then 586, for those in 586, that's on environmental economics, environmental accounting. And that to me is just this one massive design problem that we're in the process of undertaking right now. And I work on all those different problems in different ways, on different projects in reality, then also in research. So I have some stuff to say about that, both from my previous history and in my own learning, but then in my doing right now, the stuff that I'm actually working on. So with that, I'm going to get right into it. And we're going to go, for those that are new, the routine is this. I pick a topic and then I just talk a bit about it, and we can have questions as we go, but the tendency usually is to have more questions towards the end. So if you have a burning question, feel free to just shoot it into the chat, and I'll try and address it either immediately or I'll just take a note of it and we'll jump on that. And then, the reason why this is live is because, I want it to be live and I want you to ask questions. Okay, so it's not canned, it's like, happens as we go. All right, so um, what is design? That's the first thing, right? That I'd like to put forward. What does it have to do with it? So what does design have to do with sustainable development? And I have my feelings, but what do you think? What role does design have to play here? Is planning, sure. What else? Blueprints, I mean, that's part of it, yeah, at a very concrete level. That's one aspect of it. Understand challenges for sure. What are other manifestations of design that are kind of requisite in achieving sustainable development? Putting principles into the project for sure. Like if you're designing an environmental management system, sure, yeah. I mean, putting communications design into a campaign for, a program, a policy, a political party, whatever. I mean, that's a design process. What else? KPIs, key indicators, sure. Design process. What else? It's a big part of, are we going to just stop doing what we're doing right now? Like as a human, we've tried that. We're doing that, right? We stopped, and it's not sustainable. Design the future is finding the outcome. But if we're going to continue to operate as a species, um, we have to, like, it includes every aspect. We have to new innovations. That's one of the things I was looking for, right? Like we've stopped, right? And it's worked. Look at what's happened. Foxes have come back, right, Josh? Uh, we've got wildlife coming into the cities. This is great. Pollution has gone down in China and various parts of the world. Atmospheric scientists are loving it because they're seeing this kind of blip. Climate change researchers love this. It's like Bhopal, right? Oh, Bhopal is great because you had this, you know, big, huge catastrophe that allowed us to better understand what's going on in the atmosphere. 17% greenhouse gas drop in the 2 months. Huge. Yeah, I don't know exactly if that's the true number. Wouldn't surprise me, but it's massive. But is this sustainable, what we're doing? Can we keep on like this? No, we cannot, right? We're seeing that right now. We can't do this. We've seen that it's good. Stopping to consume is good. It has an impact. But we are a consumptive group of people. We operate. We have an economy for a reason. It is a means by which we interchange goods and services and operate in our world. So there's certain things, design aspects that play a role in making that more sustainable, and that's what we're going to talk about. Okay. So basic definition of design. A design is a plan or specification for the construction of an object or system, or for the implementation of an activity or process, or the result of that plan or specification in the form of a prototype, product, or process. The verb design expresses the process of developing a design, right? That's from the Cambridge Dictionary. Another example, environmental design is the process of addressing surrounding environmental parameters, devising plans, programs, policies, buildings, or products, seeks to create spaces that will enhance the natural, social, cultural, and physical environment of particular areas. That's from the Encyclopedia of the City. Sustainable design seeks to reduce the negative impacts on the environment and the health of and comfort of the building occupants, thereby improving building performance. Basic objectives of sustainability are to reduce consumption of renewable resources, non-renewable resources, minimize waste, healthy, productive environments. Principles are optimize site potential, minimize non-renewable energy consumption, use environmentally preferable products, protect and conserve water, enhance indoor air quality, optimize operational maintenance practices. So that's kind of a building design thing. Ecological design, okay, another example of a type of design, okay, type of design, ecological design, one of my favorites. Design often fails because it involves many fields of specialized knowledge that are not adequately communicated and integrated into the design process in a seamless and timely way. The heart of collaboration is face-to-face open communication between clients and design teams that integrate knowledge across disciplines. The process begins not with numbers and metrics, but through creating shared agreement of aspiration and intention, opportunities and constraints. Eco-design is a meta-disciplinary approach in which diverse interests and expertise fuse into shared vision, which generates collaborative solutions. Okay, that's a quote taken from a gentleman by the name of Sim van der Rijn. Biomimicry, good example. Sim van der Rijn's all over that. So if you don't know about Sim van der Rijn, you do now, and you can thank me for the rest of your life. Just kidding. But you will. I mean, he's amazing, this stuff. This guy's the original gangster of ecological design. He's written a book called Ecological Design, which if you're interested in this stuff, check it out. I read it a long time ago, and it's still like top of the shelf. Really great. So, point is, I've given you a lot of definitions. There are many types of design and many interpretations in the environmental context. It's a really pliable concept. So in that sense, it's confusing because you can say, well, we're using design to do this. Like now it's design thinking, right? That's the thing now. Design thinking, we should use design thinking. And I hear all these talks about design thinking and they're so like all over the place, really, a lot of them. And they're just kind of very esoteric and they don't really give you a concrete examples of what that actually means, right? So what I'm going to do is going to try and ground this concept and these ideas in practicality, okay? So what are the gurus saying though? Like, let's talk about the gurus for a moment. Start. It's nice to talk about the gurus and say, okay, whoa, what do they do? Because they speak a lot. Gurus spend a lot of time speaking often and less time doing. However, some of these gurus I'm going to show you do a lot of doing too. In fact, most of them do. So I don't have many negative things to say about these folks. They're actually, for the most part, doing cool stuff. First one, Bruce Mau. Anybody heard of Bruce Mau? Yes or no? No, you have now. I guess he was a lot bigger about 10 years ago. He's a pretty big deal 10 years ago. I think perhaps he hasn't really kind of sustained as much. So Bruce Mau, reason why he's not the #1 guru, but he's up there in terms of his thinking. He does one thing that I think Bruce Mau has done a really good job of and continues to do a good job, promoting interdisciplinarity in design. So if you look at his website and his works, he's got a studio in Toronto, I think, or Chicago as well. I don't know. He used to be in just Toronto. But he really promotes kind of an integrated design approach, and a lot of his work is focused on sustainability, communicating it through kind of immersive experiences like at nature centers or brand experiences, a lot of brand experience stuff. But he has this thing, Massive Change. Did anybody ever see that? Massive Change. It was a traveling exhibit that went across Canada that talked about massive change, right? And a colleague of mine actually managed that, and he went from museum. He was in the Vancouver Museum, and I think he was in Toronto or whatever. But I mean, his work I think is really interesting in some respects to look at how you can cross over between different design disciplines with the kind of the core mission of really promoting sustainability. Now, more importantly, why I bring him up is what you don't want to do. So what you do not want to do is you don't want to disciplinarity. Okay, do not disrespect disciplinarity by promoting interdisciplinarity. Okay, that's not a good idea in my opinion, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why he's not as in vogue now as he was before. I saw a lecture of his at McGill when I was doing grad work there a while ago, and he was talking about interdisciplinarity and how disciplinarity was really handcuffing us, and kind of I don't know I get that the interpretation there was like we need to like get away from disciplinarity and focus just on interdisciplinarity, this holistic approach, which is fine, it's true. But guess what? There's a lot of architecture students and architects in the audience, and you don't want to tell any discipline that their discipline isn't really doing what we need to be done to get done right now. We still need architecture, right? We still need biochemistry. We still need electrical engineering. We still need environmental engineering. We still need epidemiologists. We need disciplinary specialization in certain areas. But at the same time, some of these problems are so diverse. I mean, a lot of the stuff that my team and I work on is so cross-boundary. We need to have like a lawyer. We need to have a climate change scientist. We need to have software developers. We need to have a lot of different disciplines working together in some of these projects, most of them, in fact. But that's not to say that we don't need disciplinary knowledge. We need to be able to combine it effectively. That's, I think, the key message there. So the key message with Bruce Mal's stuff is, yes, interdisciplinarity, very important. Does that mean we throw disciplinary thinking out the window? No, we do not. We don't do that. And we don't kind of pretend to do that either. Okay? Another design guru who I'm a very big fan of is William McDonough. So I've mentioned this to some on, I believe, on a podcast before, certainly to those in 415. William McDonough. So he is famous for what? What's William McDonough famous for? Anybody know? Here we go. Yes, cradle to cradle, cradle to grave, same thing, more or less, is life cycle assessment. So he's, basically coined the term cradle to cradle design, or, life cycle assessment for products. And so life cycle thinking and life cycle assessment doesn't apply just to products, but it applies to the circular economy as well. It applies to how we frame, how we structure our economy. So and McDonough has been around for a long time. Like, it's not new. Like, he's been at it for a while with his partner, who William McDonough is an architect. See, like, he's an architect by training. So what else do you need when you're looking at this kind of product engineering type of stuff, right? Especially when you're dealing processes and so forth. You need a really good understanding of materials and chemistry. So his partner, whose name escapes me right now, is a chemist. So they together worked on this kind of whole idea of cradle to cradle design, and in fact, they've even created a certification for cradle to cradle design for products and so forth. So that kind of thinking, I think, is extremely important. And today, finally, circular economy is getting, that's it. Is it N, or I think it might be M, Bromgart, is getting the attention it deserves. So we're seeing a lot more attention to circular economy stuff these days than we have any that I've ever seen before. Like, big conferences on it, a lot of work being done. I've been pulled into some projects. Really exciting to see people actually in the mainstream talking about this stuff. So big brands, right, talking about circular economy in their product design and so forth. Really fantastic stuff. Okay, but again, it's a design process, right? You're looking at how you're doing things, how you're creating products, how you're delivering services, how you're running an economy, and how to incorporate that kind of circular thinking in how you structure it. So we've kind of addressed that in 586 in the modeling stuff we've looked at, right? How to system model stuff, especially when you're looking at natural resources. But you can do the same kind of approach when you're looking at a manufacturing process, right? Or production of materials. Okay? Another guru out there who's quite vocal and getting good traction, doing some great stuff, is our friend Pavan Sukhdev. Okay, so if you look at that video, not right now, but I will. These notes are, I've now got my note thing together, so all the notes that I'm talking from that I've made and links are available in the notes that are associated with these videos, which can be downloaded on the YouTube description of the videos. So fear not if you're not writing all this stuff down. You can get all this information off of those notes, which is accessible on YouTube from the description of the video. So Pavan Sukhdev. Familiar with Pavan Sukhdev? Anybody? Yes or no? I imagine some of you are, because some of you have had my courses, so you know that. Okay. So Pavan Sukhdev, also a really interesting guy. So for 580 or 560, sorry, 560 for environmental. We're going to look a lot into his stuff. Pavan Sukhdev is one of the key founders behind Teeb. So Pavan Sukhdev is he's a banker actually by training. So he's not an economist. He's a banker. He worked. I forget what his academic training's in. I think it's in economics, I think, but not like he's not publishing stuff on that area. He worked at Deutsche Bank and was in charge of, like, he was running deals, doing banking. But then he really got onto this thing of like nature's values weren't captured in traditional banking, right? So what he then set out to do was to create ways and processes and standards by which the value of nature can be incorporated into mainstream finance, into mainstream banking. So he then assembled economists, because you need economists to do this kind of stuff, and you need finance professionals to come up with Teeb, right? So I'll put that through here just one sec. You need to see this. 560, we're going to get right into this. For others, I would recommend taking a look at this if you haven't seen it already. Teeb is the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. 560 is environmental accounting, sorry. So Teeb, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. So Teeb started in 2009, I think, 2010-ish. Came out of a COP conference for biodiversity. That's when it originated at the Biodiversity Convention for Biological Diversity Conference of the Parties. They agreed that while we really need to capture biodiversity values in economic thinking, and therefore they set out at that point in time to create a means by which we could capture those values. So the value of biodiversity in ecosystems that was not captured in traditional economic thinking or accounting, right? So these are essentially what it set out to do, was to provide some baseline processes, procedures, and values, more so than anything else, for ecosystem services and biodiversity that were utilized in economic transactions but not accounted for. Like, for instance, if you're running a production facility, like a manufacturing plant, and you're using water in an area where water is scarce, there's an economic cost to that that traditionally wasn't valued, right? It's just, well, there's water there, so we'll use it. You're using stuff for free, right? That's the essence. They're called externalities, right? You're using materials that aren't priced, and you're producing pollution that is having a negative impact on the environment that doesn't have a cost to it. So what Teeb has set out to do is to create a robust standard, a very diverse standard now. It's expanded for looking at industry-specific standards, whereby you can attach economic values to some of those ecosystem service and biodiversity parameters. So for instance, if you're producing stuff and you use a lot of like cotton, right? Well, what's the cost of that cotton, right? There's an ecological cost to that cotton. So Teeb does that. Whereas we'd all struggled up until that point in time in having defendable values, whereas TEEB is becoming, more widely accepted by finance professionals, and this allows us to do things like full cost accounting for a T-shirt, right, or whatever you're producing, or like a manufacturing facility or whatever. There's a paper on this topic in relation to equilibrium forest. There we go. Yeah, so that would be an example of that. I'm going to show you some other examples of that. But TEEB is a framework. Like it actually gives someone who's working on this some economic values they can use in doing an environmental profit and loss account. The full cost of what you're doing from an environmental standpoint, not just your production costs and the profits that you make from selling something. Okay, so, and if you look at that video, he in his TED Talk that I've put through there, he talks about that. Like the essence of it is putting a value on nature. Now, this has been highly contentious. This isn't about that, this lecture, and I can do one about that later. But because this is always, and it will continue to be an issue, it's less so now, but it was big time a problem before. How can you cost nature? There's intrinsic value to nature. Well, we agree with that. We can't, it's hard to cost like the spirit bear or something, but there comes a point at which we really have to have practical tools to do trade-off analysis and look at the economics, because economics does really drive the consumption decisions that we make, right? And it allows us to give us to make these decisions and have rationale behind it, to look at, well, here's the benefit from doing a pipeline, but here's the cost, right? Potential cost to nature, and then therefore potential cost to tourism. It allows us to give us more powerful arguments, and do it in a practically convincing way. So Pavan Sukhdev, guru, okay? So he's talking about that, right? But I'm going to come back to the design item later. What about this person no one knows about? David Suzuki. Has anybody ever heard of David Suzuki before? He's a really obscure person. Not many people heard about him before. He's talked about nature. I don't know if you've never. Yeah, you met him in Victoria. I actually showered with him at the gym one time when I was at Ron Zalco gym. Funnily enough, working out, and then looked over and there's David Suzuki. It was just we're in the same change room. There's nothing more than that. But highly influential. David Suzuki has been talking about this, but from a design standpoint, he's controversial, yes, and I hope controversial. His positions, maybe, or my example, one of the two. They're both controversial, I guess. David Suzuki, to give, like, his stuff has been on my radar for a long time. I grew up in that era and read his books and so forth. His key thing is about a paradigm shift. It's about a different way of looking at things. Now, I can't see eye to eye with him on pretty much 95% of his recommendations, largely because I just have had too much exposure to industry. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Maybe I just care too much about working people. I don't know what it is, but I just don't see a lot of the things that he proposes as being realistic, frankly. And however, I saw him speak recently about the last couple of years, and kind of, I guess, had to come to Jesus moment in, like, for instance, energy. I think of some of his positions about energy and the time frame for transition. I'd like to switch to renewables tomorrow, but we have way too much. We have way too much weight in that, in capital. Like, we've got a lot of investments in our energy systems right now, that we need to be realistic about the transition. I think hydro as well. Like, I will weigh on the side of when we have, like, are we going to choose, say, natural gas versus heavy oil? I would choose natural gas as opposed to nothing, right? As a transition, as a means of transitioning to cleaner energy sources. Am I willing to look at, say, the Peace River project? So the big hydro project in Peace River. Am I willing to look at that and say, okay, well, are we going to do that and provide a heck of a lot of electricity and try and shift more away from heavy hydrocarbon based and accept the fact that we're going to have a pretty big impact with that? Yeah, I would say I would lean more towards that and be able to say, look, we have to accept some of these trade-offs. Whereas, David Suzuki tends not to be able to accept anything. It tends to be, all or nothing. In my experience with some of the things that their papers and so forth, which I don't think is a bad thing, to be honest with you. I think it's a good thing. But my job, I don't see me personally. My job is not to occupy that space. I occupy the space where we kind of design solutions where it's not always perfect, right? But I do agree with and will remain to be supportive of his position on a paradigm shift where we need to put nature more at the center of our decision making, and that ultimately I think that's what his main position is, to put nature at the center of our decision making. Now, how we do that, I mean, that's a different task, and I can provide some more specific examples on these notes. I will do that actually. Things that I think are great, and I agree with seeing this. I think I don't think will work. And also, like, yeah, there's other personal stuff in the past too. Other guru, Ray Anderson. Okay. Has anybody heard of Ray Anderson before? Yes, he is the carpet guy. Okay. So, redesigning business. Okay. Let's see, on the fossil fuel from media for change. If members of society were disqualified for change while the person insists they want to alter to make fire, humans have always had to use one source of energy. Next. Exactly. I mean, I'd love to, like, if we had like zero carbon energy or whatever, fusion or something like that, or hydrogen. Hydrogen's been around for a long time. Like, look at Ballard, fantastic company. Read David Scott's book. I mean, if that were reality right now, gosh, I mean, read his book. If that were what we were living right now, awesome. But we have to transition, and transition sometimes means we're doing things that we don't want to do. I fly on planes. I fly on planes, and I'm well aware of the fact that they are highly polluting as I go to the Caribbean to meet with stakeholders, to like work with them to build environmental information systems to help them be more, resilient to changes that are resulting, that seems, from climate change, right? So there's a bit of paradox in that. I'm polluting in order to deal with adaptation. So I don't know. I'm okay with that, though. I understand, and I'm comfortable with being someone calling me a hypocrite, if that's what they want to call me, because I use planes, right? Ray Anderson, great example, redesigning business. It's a design process. What Ray had done, he's deceased now, but if you are not familiar with his company, it is a company to look at for how you manifest change in business. And this is not about the economics per se. I mean, it is, but it's more about the vision. So they started with a principle, right? They wanted to get to planet sustainability. It's like zero impact on the environment as a company. And that one goal and that one principle was really the starting point of a long term. It wasn't overnight. If you look at the story of did that, it wasn't like a 2-year project. I think it was over 13 years or maybe more that they, did dramatic changes, though, really dramatic changes, and ultimately changed their business, not just kind of, fundamentally. Like, they fundamentally changed how they did what they did. Went from like a carpet company, which is, the traditional carpet company at that point in time, say in the 80s, 90s, was, highly polluting, right? Lots of off-gassing of chemicals and so forth, a lot of waste, tons of waste, all that shag carpet like being discarded. And they really changed, incorporated life cycle assessment and all these different kind of ways of thinking to rent carpet. Basically, it would take the carpet at the end of the life. Really a carbon analytics, great carbon story there as well. So, but again, it was a design process to redesign, and he was the owner, and so he was able to motivate that kind of change. So, I mean, you can see by some of these gurus, and there's many more, but these are just a few that I've chosen, that design plays a role in all of the things that they are promoting and that they have done, right? It's an important thing. So, but what does it mean in terms of its application then? So where do we point ourselves, and where do we look to apply design thinking to actually really do stuff. Okay? So what does it mean in application? It means transformative change requires concrete action. Okay? Uh, which I would argue requires design. So when I say transformative change, now this is an important word or phrase. So if you're at all following anything that's going on at the international level in environmental policy, particularly in biodiversity, uh, transformative change is what you will hear now. That's the buzzword. Transform change. If you look at anything coming out of the CBD right now, Convention for Biodiversity, which is the international body, like the WHO, but for biodiversity, um, transformative change. We need transformative change. We need transformative change, right? We need to mainstream biodiversity and ecosystems. That's the thing. That's what you hear all the time, blah, 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 blah. But what does that mean? Because I don't, often I go to conferences and I say, okay, well, what are we going to do then? Like I know we had transformative change, but like, show me an example of that. So Ray Anderson's an example. But I would say that it requires design. So design is the vehicle for that transformative change that we're seeking to do, right? But it's a very diverse phenomenon and it has many different facets to it, okay? So I'm going to pick out 4 different areas where I think this design movement needs to take traction, okay? Number 1, technology design. So there's this obvious role that technology has in this, as I alluded to at the start of this. We can stop doing everything, we can stop consuming, and fine, we'll have less of an impact on the environment, as we've seen over the last couple months with greenhouse gas emissions going down, nature creeping back into cities, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not sustainable. Like this is kind of these social riot or protests and so forth, and people's economic livelihoods being destroyed is not necessarily a good thing, right? So there's an obvious role that technology has to play in this, right? But not only technology itself, like the design of devices and so forth and things that we use, but also the way that we use technology and the way we organize society. So I'm going to talk about 2 things here. There's the practical design of technology, right? So for example, Tesla, Canadian Solar Energy Company, you name it, the bunch of technology companies that are doing new things. Ballard, I mentioned before, for hydrogen. I mean, that's kind of the reductionist version. There's like, come up with the new technologies that can help us like clean up the oceans, have less greenhouse gas emissions, monitor our impacts better, like satellite remote sensing and so forth. But there's also social technology. So this idea, I'd like you to write down, I'm going to share this, which is a technological approach or a way of looking at how we organize ourselves in general, systematically, and how that can be reconfigured. And so my mentor in this area was Professor Mario Bunge, and he's written a lot on social technology. So I would recommend taking a look at some of his stuff and his students' stuff in this area. So just one sec, I'm gonna send through a link. Here we go. So this is a great book. If you have some extra time and really feel like getting into this, then this is the book to read. Now, this won't give you it won't give you practical examples per se, but what it will do is it will give you a philosophical basis for your thinking, and a very strong one. Get much stronger than this. So this book here is Social Science Under Debate, and a philosophical perspective, and he kind of gives you a philosophical basis for that kind of thinking. For that kind of design thinking can start at a philosophical basis, and he looks at the logic and how you apply kind of systems frameworks to structuring things and making sure things are logically coherent. right? That's what he's very good at. And his writing is very clear, unlike a lot of philosophers. So that's a really good base for looking at the idea of a social technology. How do we design cities? You know, how do we organize how we move around? Car sharing is a great example of a social technology, right? Laws and policies are, in fact, social technologies. So that's a really good example of a meta example of meta design at work from a technological standpoint. Communications design is another key area that I think we need to look at in terms of sustainability. And so 586, this is what we're working on right now. So how do we strategically share information and communicate with one another, right? So this has a really important role to play. Clearly, the media has a role to play, but what are we trying to achieve though with communication? This is the key. Communication. What's the goal and the route? Well, I mean, start to look at what communication is then to a start, right? Starting with that word, communication. Well, the root of that word is communis, the word communis, which is Latin, and it means common ground. So one could argue, yeah, understanding common ground. That's technically the root of the word communication is communis, like community. Communis is common ground. So communication is, one could say, it's the process of attempting to reach common ground, i.e. understanding. So one could argue, and many people, there's a whole realm of communication studies that we can look at all the different aspects of it. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to find common ground, that's the role of communication. So, but are we though? I mean, is that what is happening right now today? Would you say that? Well, that's a question. Do you think we're reaching common ground today? No, exactly. It's not. It's not really. It's becoming more polarized, right? It's very interesting, and you got to ask yourself why that is. Is it because we have different views, or is it are there other things at work here? And I think there are other things at work, actually. I don't think we're that far apart, really, at the end of the day. Too much information, yeah, but it's also okay, I'm going to get to that. So, so interestingly, Marshall McLuhan, who's a famous Canadian media studies scholar from the 70s. Are you familiar with Marshall McLuhan? You've heard of him. You must have heard one of his famous quotes before. If not, you will hear it right now. Yes, the medium is the message. Okay, so Marshall McLuhan is a Canadian communications philosopher slash scholar, and what he became famous for was that phrase, the medium is the message, right? So this is at a time when like TV was really just getting traction and stuff like this. And so his argument was that the medium by which communication is taking place is the message. It's influencing what people are understanding or receiving, right? It has a big role to play. It's not just what's being said, it's what is being used to deliver that message. Okay? So then, I mean, taking Marshall McLuhan, this is just a very rudimentary analysis of his work. So taking that, and we think, okay, well, what's happening today then, right? What is the medium today where a lot of our communication is being established? Social media, right? So what specifically is unique about social media? There's a lot of it. Yep. Caters to your beliefs. That's one thing. Quick. That's what I was looking for. Network system. It's short, right? Our attention spans are going down a bit. It caters to your belief. That's one of the characteristics, just due to the nature of some of these things. Self-selecting. So if you start to find content, it detects what what you like to look at, then keeps on feeding you similar stuff. So it reinforces your beliefs. That's one example of the medium is the message. There's a self-reinforcement mechanism there, right? Non-verifiable data sources, sure. So fake news, right? That's another thing. Censorship, it's another thing. We have to spend a lot more time ourselves verifying these sources, and even the verifiable sources that we expect to trust, right, are spinning certain narratives. And let's be honest, that's true. So, again, I hate to say it, but what some people say about these fake news, or at least some kind of biased media, it's very true. I can know what to expect when I look at Fox News. I know what to expect when I go to CNN, right? Like I really know. And so that's a problem, right? We have to work a lot harder to get to neutral sources of data, neutral sources of information. So this whole, like, the medium is the message that McLuhan said way back, like, this is not new, has some truth to it, right? So short snippets and visual bites are what are forming our impressions and our truth, our beliefs. Social media is all about that. So how long will this remain? It's hard to say. I don't know. I have no idea what the answer to that question is, but it's a reality. So I think one of the things is, I think it's important to understand how these things work and how we can use it to establish truths and sustainable truths that we, based on our knowledge and our beliefs and our expertise, we can get behind and we stand behind. Okay? So communicate, and that's a design process, right? Thirdly, economics and finance. For those that are in 560, this is an important part of what we're going to be working on, is the role of design in economics and finance. So in many cases, we are having to adapt our financial and economic systems. And in some ways, that's a very fundamental transformation that's occurring, right? So these phrases or buzzwords of green economy, blue economy, these are ideas that reflect this, right? So at the surface, they're buzzwords, right? Green economy, blue economy. However, but if you take a closer look at this and look at specific projects that are done under their guise, so under the umbrella of green economy projects or blue economy projects, you will see exactly what that means. And I'll give you some examples. Namely, so one example, specifically what that means is incorporation of previously unpriced natural phenomenon into conventional economic thinking. That's what it means, ultimately. So to give you an example, so for a green economy project, there's no better example of a green economy project than REDD projects. REDD, reduced emissions from ecosystem degradation and deforestation, or REDD+. Right? So this is a process by which forests, rainforests in particular in tropical environments, are given economic price for the carbon that they store, with the idea that by conserving those rainforests and those valuable ecosystems, those greenhouse gases that would normally have been emitted through land degradation or deforestation are kept in the ground and they are not emitted into the atmosphere. And therefore, the equivalent of those greenhouse gas emissions are given a price per ton, and that is then supplied to those that are the owners or stewards of that land. And that's done at a project level, like at a private forest or something like that, but then also done at a national for countries that have, say, crown land, if you want to call it crown land, or government-owned land, where they have opted to conserve that land, and therefore they have been able to do a deal in which they get financing from different bodies to conserve it, which then equates to an offset credit for the buyer, right? That's the nature of a REDD+ project, a carbon offset from conserved forests. Okay, so where does this work? Well, it works all over the place. It's not new. It's been happening since roughly 2007, 8, really kind of picked up around then, and now it's becoming much more mainstream. And one place where it's working extremely effectively is a place where I'm working right now, in Guyana. So if you look at this website, you'll see that as a result of their REDD project, they have had, let me take a look, I think it's 35% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, something like that, pretty astronomical, the amount of savings that they have created. Just one sec, I'm gonna see what the actual, it's 32 maybe, 32% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So very effective. Now, how does that work? Well, you need a lot to go along with that, right? You need to monitor, you need to enforce, You need to have a buyer. You need to have someone who's willing to put up the cash for all that stuff. So in that case, the government of Norway or the Kingdom of Norway has provided a lot of the initial financing for that project. So that's part of Norway's plan, evidently, to control their greenhouse gas emissions, because Norway has pretty significant greenhouse gas emissions. They're not like running on solar power. They have pretty heavy duty oil and gas industry there, but they heavily invest in these kind of projects where they can generate offset credits through conserving rainforests in places where they otherwise would be degraded or deforested, right? And this is how REDD+ works. And Guyana is a very, very successful and well operating, transparent REDD program that they have there that has benefited their country, Guyana, and also benefited Norway. But that's green economy at work, very practically speaking. So another example of this kind of economic, but it's design transformation, is a blue economy. So blue economy is still at where green economy stuff was 10 years ago, I would say, right? So we're just starting to get a handle on blue economy stuff. So we don't have as many projects out there, but the ideas are really becoming more prevalent, particularly for small island developing states, SIDS. So because you'd think small islands, it's like, okay, they don't have much land, right? It's like, well, they don't. They're usually small, but if you look at their ocean rights, the amount of ocean that they have legal rights to, some of these small island developing states are really big ocean states. Small island, big ocean. They have a lot of rights to the ocean. Therefore, a lot of rights to the natural resources that exist in those oceans. So this is where it's a big benefit to some of these small island developing states. So one excellent example of a very practical blue economy project is in the Seychelles. So Seychelles has done tremendous work in marine conservation, and they've done it through economic tools or mechanisms, right? And so what they have done is they've done what they call marine conservation debt swaps, right? And so I'm not going to go into the depth of it, but I will, generally speaking, this is when the sovereign of one of these countries has been purchased by an intermediary. In this case, it's the TNC. The Nature Conservancy has helped out to develop a kind of a body, like a trust. It's a marine trust, I think they call it. Seychelles Marine Trust, I think that's the name, to buy that debt at a discounted rate. And then with private money, well, in some cases, private investors, in other cases, it's philanthropic money as well. So TNC has a very good network of philanthropic donors who give them money to conserve land, right? So here's $1 million and I want you to conserve land. So it's called the Nature Conservancy. And they've gotten really good at doing that. They've got excellent people who know how you monitor this stuff and all the financial mechanisms in order to do that. And they've started to do this over the last few years, I think it's 5 years maybe, of doing these debt swaps where they buy a sovereign debt and pay it back, but they get it at a discounted rate. So they're able to then kind of make money on that debt difference. And they're using, I guess, in essence, they're using this kind of, the bridge to doing that is this philanthropic money they're getting to promote conservation. And that kind of differential that they create is used to finance marine conservation. So part of the deal with the TNC is, yes, we will get the financing to buy your, but then you have to put in marine conservation methods and mechanisms and policies. And we will help you with that, like monitoring and so forth. And the financing comes as a part of this debt swap process, okay? So look at that link, and there's some good papers on that I can share that spell that out. Just a sec, so I'm clear. A developed country is paying into a program where a developing country is sequenced. So that's REDD. So for REDD, a REDD+ program, typically the way it works is you have, they're not always developing countries, but usually they are, because most of these tropical ecosystems, like in Brazil or Nicaragua or Guyana, or there's a lot in Southeast Asia, Thailand, has the threat of deforestation occurring. Why? Because they have people that need to make a living, right? They have often, the deforestation that occurs in these countries is as a result of even smallholder farmers who are going to mow down the rainforest and make a small acreage such that they can tend cattle and develop a cattle plantation or agriculture. But cattle is the easiest. Chop down the forest, raise some cows. When you need the money, you sell the cow. It's the quickest and the easiest way to liquidate your asset and get cash for it. That's why they do it. It's and relatively low risk compared to agriculture, right? And you can control that. You feed the cow, let it grow, boom, 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 and then you sell it, you're done, you get the money. Whereas to kind of turn that corner to find, okay, well, we need to create economic disincentives for that. So the economic disincentive is to create an incentive for conservation, to pay people to not cut down rainforests at a price that makes sense, such that the rainforest is left standing, the carbon stays in the rainforest, and the equivalent of those greenhouse gas emissions that are not emitted that otherwise would be emitted are then put on the market, right? So that's where the finance comes from. Like, we've invested in this RED program as a bank or as the country of Norway, and as a result, I don't know, 300,000 tons of CO2 have not been emitted to the atmosphere. That gives us an offset credit of 300,000 tons of CO2, right? So there is an offset side of that. Now, that's not to say that that is always the motivation, right? To say, okay, well, now we can emit these greenhouse gas emissions, but that's part of it, right? So offsets is debatable, right? Offsets is a debatable industry, but there are RED projects that are just pure donor money. Here's the money that we want to put towards conservation. Here you go. And then they do calculate the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that have occurred. Right now, for the debt swaps, it's complicated because you're dealing with a sovereign debt that the developing country has. But does that pay for it? Yeah, I mean, that's the argument. The argument is, does that give a free ticket to developing countries to just proceed? Yeah, I mean, it gives them room to do it. But at the same time, it also, most of the countries that are engaged in RED Plus projects are on that path anyway. Like, most of the countries that are on the path to investing that kind of money in avoided deforestation projects are investing in renewables and making the transition. Frankly, I don't see a lot of energy companies in Alberta investing in RED projects, to be honest with you, right? I wish they would, and I think they could, but they don't seem to be in that, and I'm not jumping all over them, but that's just the case. Whereas there's other banks and there are banks out there that are, sorry, that was my phone, that are like really at the front of that. I think we can. I'd like to see us move in that direction. In fact, I think that should have been part of the deal for any approval of pipelines, right? Let's offset everything. Let's offset the whole well-to-wheel analysis, well-to-wheel greenhouse gas emissions for the Kinder Morgan pipeline extension project. Let's do it for the next 10 years, and we'll offset every greenhouse gas emission through things like RED Plus. Why not, right? Or equivalent agriculture. There's a lot of different ag projects we could do, but we gotta make the commitment to that. I just don't see that as much in Canada as I do see that with other countries that I work with. Marine conservation one is a little more complicated, but it's dealing with a debt swap. There's a debt that's purchased, still paid back, but there's a discounted rate for the purchase of that debt, and that discounted rate allows for a difference for money to be then made, essentially, and then used for conservation purposes like monitoring and so forth. I'd read more up on that debt swap stuff because it's really fascinating what they're doing. And TNC is a very legit organization, and they're doing great work. And I can share that in the notes. You'll see more about that in the notes. And the last example of an economic design is pollution taxation, taxing pollution. Okay, this is understood in the literature to mean the most effective way of dealing with greenhouse gas emissions. Effective meaning economically least costly, the least cost to society through things such as carbon taxation. Now, that's under the caveat that it's done in a very transparent way, and you know where that carbon revenue is going, et cetera, et cetera. And I can't say that's always the case. But in the case of British Columbia, I think we've done a pretty good job. So I've included this link here, or I'm including this link here, of the carbon taxation, which has been since 2008 or 9. It's been in effect in BC and done fairly well. Widely accepted. Yes, it means that things get more expensive, like gasoline and so forth. Does it reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Yes, it does. That's what the results show. At the rate that we need it to, probably not. But I mean, that gets into the pricing side of things. Like for instance, they are not raising it as they expected they would this year up to, I think it's 30, and then they were going to raise it to $50 a ton. And because of COVID and the impacts that are associated with it, they said they're going to hold off on that. So, but the BC carbon tax is taxing. It's an economic instrument that's taxing a externality that previously was not taxed, right? And if you're familiar with emissions, SOx and NOx have been taxed, or at least permitted. There's been penalties for exceeding your quota for SOx and NOx emissions in, say, refineries and so forth for years. It's been around to deal with the acid rain. So it's not a new thing. Like, that's why I think when people say carbon tax is so new, it's like not new at all. Like we've had penalties for emissions for a long time. So it's not new at all. I mean, widespread blanket tax, yes, that's new. But we've been working with it in BC for a while. But you have to trust the tax man. Yeah, the tax person, I guess. You have to trust them. And I'm not sure that's the case right now. I would think that's the caveat would be you have to say, okay, well, we're being taxed, but then this is going to be effectively used, or I mean, that funding is going to be revenue neutral. Initially, they're meant to be revenue neutral, but is it? And then secondly, where is that revenue being allocated to? So those are details that we can look in more closely. I will actually for 560. Economic trade is relatively new. Not really. I mean, I don't know. It depends what you call new. Economic trade of carbon credits since 2000 and early 2000s. The European ETS, the emissions trading system, has been around for a long time. A long time. So, but I mean, the thing is, it doesn't work unless you have regulations. Really, you need to have guidelines and policies. So if you look at the European ETS, EU ETS, Google that. In Europe, the emissions trading system's been around for years, right? It's mid 2000s, early 2000s, been around. But Europe has had regulations in place for controlling greenhouse gas emissions, largely cap and trade. You have this quota, and then if you exceed that, you have to go buy carbon credits. If you're below that, you have offsets to sell, and that's how it kind of works. But the key is, and we've tried this in Canada, right? In Montreal, they had the Montreal Climate Exchange. It didn't work. That was in 2007 and 8, I think. They started to launch this carbon trading platform at the Montreal Climate Exchange, the Montreal Stock Exchange. Didn't work. Why? Quote unquote from the guy who developed it. It was developed with the caveat and the understanding that there would be regulations put in place, right? If you don't have the regulations, you don't have the incentive. If there's no incentive, there's no motivation to either trade or, either give or purchase emissions credits. That's what the failure was of the Montreal Climate Exchange. And you can quote me on that. Lastly, the last element of design that we need to think about here, or next avenue, governance. Governance design. This is the most difficult one, I would say. This is perhaps the most challenging. Why? Because laws aren't known to be flexible. They're laws. Laws are laws. It's the law, right? However, the problem is we are living in times at which we need to be adaptable, right? I think we're starting to realize that. We can look around and see that. There's a pretty strong argument for adaptive management now, and it's been around for a while. We've been talking about adaptive management and doing it for years, adaptive co-management. However, we are living in times in which we need to be adaptable. So how do you recognize the fact that we have relatively rigid and concrete governance systems in times at which we need to be adaptable, right? At a management level, we've got a better handle on that, right? Because I think it's a little easier to change resource management policies and programs. But law is different. So how do we reconcile these things? With caution, I would say. Be cautious. Why should we be cautious? Right? We think we should be cautious about fundamentally changing how we conduct our governance. Why do you think we should be cautious? That's my question. Do you have proof of the fact that we should be cautious? I have a proof of an example that I'm going to share with you, that that is pretty good evidence why we should be cautious. Anybody, any ideas? Why should we be cautious? Because it literally affects every aspect of this. Yes, for sure. Governance affects everything, depending on what area we're working with. Like energy policy, right? To change how we constitute and legislate energy production, oil and gas, hydro, whatever, nuke. Yes, and there are examples of that. So ideally, we would love that everybody got along and we were on equal footing with nature and we all wore like 100% recycled stuff, and sung Kumbaya every morning, and that was how we started Parliament. Wonderful. That would be a dream. That's the utopian dream, right? I'm from Nelson. That's what we think, but it's not the way everybody thinks. So I'll give an example of how the utopian goal was pursued and some problems emerged. That's in Ecuador. Okay, so Ecuador pursued the utopian dream of rights to nature. Constitutionally, they reformed their constitution to give nature constitutional rights, right? In Pachamama and their indigenous interpretation of nature, Pachamama. If you read this, there's the actual, very similar to the Kiwis, right? Like they're very comparable. Now I don't know as much about the Kiwi situation, a bit, but not as much about the Ecuador. I think the situations worked out a bit better, but in Ecuador, there's been some pretty big hiccups. So, and largely because Ecuador is heavily reliant on oil and gas, and particularly foreign companies exploiting those resources. So the idea was at the outset, when this government that came in wanted to kind of a populist movement, I guess, if you will, around constituting nature's rights and to the rightful place in society. And the idea was to preserve nature and to gain, like REDD actually, very similar, to get financing from the international community to basically pay for the conservation of that nature through multilateral sources, such that it could be maintained and not degraded. Therefore, conserving the right of nature. So the indigenous peoples love this. The working people love this. The corporate elite probably didn't like this so much because many of them were tied in some way, shape, or form to the energy sector. This has really impacted the capability of companies to come in and exploit. The thing was, they had a goal to raise the money, and you got to think about this. And this is what we're starting to see right now in North America, right? Let's not forget governments are like businesses in a way. They need revenue, right? They need revenue. We need revenue. We need our governments to have revenue in order to do what we expect of them, right? To maintain our streets, to have policies for governing our natural resources at the federal level, right? We need to pay people, like government employees. That's what pays people to do that stuff that we expect them to do. So when we're in situations like we're in now, where that revenue has been cut off, like if you're familiar with what's going on in Vancouver, I mean, they can't run deficits. We're faced with a very, very tricky situation where municipal government that is supposed to run our city doesn't have the money that it needs to do that. So what do? Right? Similarly, in Ecuador, they said, fine, okay, nature has rights. We will conserve our natural heritage in Amazon, Ecuadorian Amazon, and so forth. And that means we kind of curtail exploitation of natural resources like oil and gas. But in order to do that, we're going to get the revenue as like an offset type of process, like REDD, from international sources. I forget what the figure was, but they wanted a 300 million or something like that US. They ended up getting at the early stage like 13 million US through, I don't know, through some mechanism. I don't know. There's a good paper I'll share with you on it. So what do you do then, right? Because that's the money that you typically would get to fund social programs, to run your country. You're in a rock and a hard place. Then you are forced to say, well, maybe we can exploit it, right? And And that's what they did. They were forced to do that. They said, okay, well, maybe we'll just do some exploitation. The problem there is once you make that claim and you constitutionally enshrine nature having those rights, what does it look like when you go and say, well, like we can exploit it in this way? You've just kind of, it's a slippery slope, right? So that's why I'm saying I think these are great ideas, but you need to be cautious about their deployment because and make sure the economics work for them. Like if in that case it didn't work because the economics didn't work. The expected source of financing that they were hoping for didn't materialize at all, not even close. And they were forced to change course and then fundamentally change what they were proposing to do from a policy standpoint. That's not good design, right? In my opinion, anyway. So here's another link to that. There's a really, really good article political scientist wrote on that. So governance, yes, we need to look at that. It's a design process, but we need to be careful about it. Right. So there is the issue of rights, but then the issue of building adaptive capacity into governance. So how do we go about doing that? I think that is a problem that we are in the process of wrestling with right now. I mean, I'm working on some stuff on that right now and many others. So adaptive governance is now kind of becoming more of a thing. If we are ever to achieve sustainable, it will be over the course of a few generations. Correct. Yeah, it's not an immediate thing. So we need a massive economic transition. We need a massive technological revolution. We need a massive governance revolution as well, right? So each one, and communications as well, I think we need to kind of better communicate about these issues and do so in a way that we can reach that common ground. And that common ground is finding a way to appreciate, recognize the fragile balance we have with nature and to promote our economic and social well-being whilst not degrading and destroying the environment. That's really kind of the challenge of our generation or the next 3 generations. Boom. Mic drop. Bang. All right, that's it for me. I don't have anything more. I'm going to post these notes to the description in the YouTube video when I put it up later tonight. So you will have access to these notes and the links, not just on this. Anybody have any questions? All make sense? This means that you all have jobs in the future, by the way. I've just kind of laid out your employment plan. So I know things are rough right now, but you guys are in the best situation possible. It's happening now. It's not happening 3 decades. It's happening now. Examples of adaptive governance in Canada. I will share some. There's good research. I wouldn't say there's good examples of it happening in practice. All right, time to wrap up. So thank you very much for coming out. Again, it's going to be recorded and up on YouTube. And we will be doing this again next week. All right, we will see you.